Cassia had learned the temple's mornings the way other people learned weather. The air always carried yesterday's smoke, the stone always held last night's cold, and the first prayers always sounded like someone testing a wound. Even now, with the braziers lit and the acolytes sweeping ash from the flagstones, the great rotunda felt half awake, as if the city beyond its doors were a rumor the temple refused to believe. She sat at a side table beneath a tarnished depiction of Alessia, her parchment spread in a fan like pale leaves. The brass relief above her had been polished so many times the details were soft. Saints reduced to smears of devotion. Cassia worked anyway, tracing what remained with her eyes, matching worn shapes to the words she'd copied from the vaults. Names mattered. Names were the first thing empire turned into law, and the last thing people kept when law failed them. The niche opposite the altar was still empty. Once, an old guidebook claimed, a statue of the ninth had stood there. A mailed god with a dragon's bearing, his gaze set not on the altar but through it, out into a future that would behave. The Concordat had removed more than a statue. It had left a gap in the temple's geometry, a missing weight that made every other pillar seem slightly wrong. Emil's sandals whispered over the stone. He moved with the careful patience of someone who had carried too much sacred certainty and watched it crack. "You're early," he said. "History doesn't sleep," Cassia murmured, then regretted the flippancy when she saw his expression. The man's eyes were red-rimmed, not from drink, but from nights that offered no rest. He leaned on the table and looked down at her papers without touching them. "Those are not common records. They were misfiled," she lied. Emil let the lie pass the way priests let sins pass when they couldn't afford another enemy. "They've been asking for access again." Cassia did not ask who. In the Imperial city you could smell the Dominion on the wind as surely as river rot. And you refused. For now, refusal is a kind of prayer. His gaze flicked against his will to the empty niche. But prayers require something to answer them. Cassia's hand tightened under the table around the small object she kept hidden in her sleeve. A plain disc of pewter, the kind pilgrims bought from river stalls, stamped with a dragon and a man's profile. A child's charm. A crime. "Do you believe," she asked softly, "that gods can be starved?" Emil's mouth worked once as if he were chewing on a word too bitter to swallow. "I believe," he said at last, "that men can be made to forget they are hungry." Outside, the bells of the market began to ring. Inside, the temple's candles fluttered in their sconces, not from any draught Cassia could feel, but as if the stone itself had sighed. By night, the Imperial city pretended it had no saints at all. The streets around the temple emptied of pilgrims and filled with sellers of meat pies and men with knives. Cassia moved through the lower wards with her hood drawn low, the pewter disc now pressed to the inside of her palm until it left a faint coin mark in her skin. Decision waited where the alley narrowed into a throat between leaning brick. He did not lounge. Soldiers who had survived long enough to be cautious never wasted energy pretending at ease. His cloak was damp, heavy with the smell of horse and old smoke. "You shouldn't be out alone," he said by way of greeting. Cassia glanced past him. At the mouth of the alley, the rain fell in thin silver lines. Somewhere a drunk sang a half-remembered hymn and got the words wrong. "I'm not alone," she said. "I'm with you." "That's arguably worse." Decision's mouth twitched, a smile that did not have time to become real. "You always were reckless. I prefer thorough." He stepped closer, and she saw the bruising beneath his collar where someone had grabbed him hard. The Dominion didn't always need blades. It had treaties and whispers and hands that knew where to squeeze. "They've moved it," Decision said. "The shipment from the west, not to the embassy vaults, not to the Tower district. Out." "Out where?" He hesitated, the way men did when they hated the sound of what they had to say. "Iliac, High Rockside, an island." Cassia felt the city's great mass around them, the weight of walls and canals and centuries, and for the first time it seemed like a cloak that could be slipped off. "Balfiera," she said, the name coming from a note she'd copied years ago and never thought she'd need. Decision's eyes sharpened. You know it. I know of it, Cassia corrected. The Direnni Tower, Adamantine. A place where stories are older than maps. Good, he said. Because they're treating it like a battlefield. New justiciars, new ships. Quiet men with crates that don't rattle when they move. What's in them? Things that shouldn't travel. Decision's jaw worked. Relics, papers, bones. He spat the last word into the rain as if it fouled his mouth. Cassia's heart beat once hard. Bones of who? Decision did not answer directly. There's talk in the barracks, he said. Not the kind you repeat. They say the Dominion's not satisfied with banning a name. They want to make it impossible. The alley seemed to tighten, as if the brick itself leaned in to listen. Cassia's fingers closed again on her hidden disc. Why tell me? She asked. You could go to your superiors. Decision gave a humorless laugh. My superiors dine with their superiors. They toast peace and call it victory. If I go to them, the Dominion will know before I finish speaking. So you came to me. Cassia tasted the iron of fear and the stranger flavor beneath it. Something like anticipation, sharp as winter air. Amiel was right, she murmured. Refusal is a kind of prayer. Decision looked at her as if he wished she were someone else, someone safer. Then pray fast, he said, and pressed a sealed packet into her hand. Because I think they've chosen the day. Behind them, at the far end of the alley, one of the silhouettes shifted, and Cassia felt the hairs along her arms lift as if they'd been touched by lightning. Erethil's hands did not shake until he was alone, and even then he resented the tremor as if it were an insult. In the presence of Tamriel he was a blade, honed and perfect, a worthy instrument of the Dominion's will. Only afterward, in the quiet, did he become a man again. Soft, flawed, prone to the treacheries of flesh. Tamriel had placed the coin in his palm as if it were a blessing. It had once borne the profile of a human emperor, the stamp of authority pressed into metal so common folk could carry obedience in their pockets. Now the face had been scraped away, smoothed to a blank circle. Do you understand what this is? Tamriel asked. A lesson, Lerithil said. A warning, Tamriel corrected. The Sapiarch's eyes were bright, unblinking like polished stone. Names can be minted, names can be defaced, and if the metal is soft enough, the old impression can be made to vanish. Lerithil turned the coin, watching torchlight skate over its ruined surface. The Concordat has done that already. The Concordat was a gate, Tamriel said. This is the lock. You will go where convention began, and remind the world what it was before it learned to lie. The word convention tasted strange even in Aldmeris, half theology, half threat. Lerithil had studied the myths as a child, the tales of Adamantine Tower, and the moment when the world agreed to become a world. It was not merely a place. It was an argument hammered into shape. And if the argument refuses? Lerithil asked. Tamriel's mouth curved, not into a smile but into the shape of certainty. Then you will make it. The low table before them held objects laid out with surgical care. A strip of parchment, inked with clauses in tight Imperial script. A small iron nail black with age. A glass vial containing red dust that seemed to pulse when the torchlight caught it. And, wrapped in linen, a fragment of something that looked like bone but felt too light when Lerithil had tested its weight. He did not ask where it came from. Questions were for scholars. He was beyond scholarship now. What of the dissidents? Lerithil said, because he had learned to hide his unease inside practical concerns. Tamriel dismissed it with a flick of ringed fingers. Let them whisper. Let them clutch their stolen charms. Belief is a fire, Lerithil. Starve it, and it becomes smoke. Smoke is easy to scatter. But smoke can choke, Lerithil said before he could stop himself. Tamriel's gaze sharpened. In it, Lerithil saw the Dominion's true face. Not hatred, not even pride, but a deep, cold impatience with anything that refused to become orderly. "You have been chosen," Neriel said softly. "Do not make me wonder if it was a mistake." The attendants shifted like shadows, and Larethil felt the weight of their silence. He bowed his head, letting his hair fall forward in the old formal way. Submission was a language as intricate as any spell. "It will be done," he said. Neriel leaned closer, voice lowered to something almost intimate. "When the world forgets that false god, you will feel it," the Sapiarch whispered. "Not as triumph, as relief, like removing a thorn that has festered for Eris." Larethil looked again at the blank coin, and in the smoothness he imagined a face trying to return, the way old scars sometimes itched in the rain. The sea did not care about empires or myths. It rose and fell with the same indifferent rhythm it had kept when the first elves had looked west and called the horizon a promise. Larethil stood on the slick deck with his boots braced wide, one hand gripping the railing, the other locked around the lacquered box hidden beneath his cloak. The box was small enough to be carried like a lover's gift, heavy enough to feel like a stone tied to his heart. Every time the ship dipped, water slapping hard against the hull, he imagined the box slipping from his grasp and vanishing into the black, dragged down to whatever old hungry things waited beneath. A sailor shouted in Aldmeri, voice torn away by wind. The mast groaned. The Dominion's banner snapped like a whip, and then wrapped itself around the pole as if it were trying to strangle its own symbol. Larethil's escort, Mainlorn, stood a few paces away. Even in the storm, the Justiciar looked composed, his hair bound tight, his armor oiled against rust. He did not glance at the horizon. He watched Larethil. "You wear a hole in that box," Mainlorn said. "It's not mine to wear," Larethil replied. "No," Mainlorn agreed. Lightning flashed, and for an instant his eyes looked pale, almost translucent. "It's the world's." Larethil had heard the Justiciar laugh exactly once months ago, when a prisoner had begged for mercy and used the wrong honorific. It had not been a sound of joy. It had been the sound of something correcting a mistake. The ship lurched. Larethil's stomach rose into his throat, and with it came a sudden, irrational memory, standing as a boy in a sunlit courtyard, listening to an old tutor speak of human gods with derision, so practiced it sounded like liturgy. Larethil had laughed then too. It had felt easy. Now in the storm, the laughter would not come. "Tell me," Larethil said, because silence was worse than waves. "Why send a ritualist to the tower? Why not an army?" Mainlorn's mouth twitched. "Armies conquer land. This is different." "That's not an answer." Mainlorn leaned in, his voice nearly lost under thunder. "Because if you march an army into a myth, you become part of it. You give it weight. You make it real. You, Larethil, are meant to do the opposite." The words settled into Larethil's bones. Make it real. Do the opposite. He looked out at the dark sea, imagining the shoreline of high rock, the jagged teeth of cliffs, the old tower rising above them like a finger accusing the sky. Another flash of lightning turned the deck white, and in that instant he thought he saw, far beyond the ship, far beyond reason, a shape in the clouds like a dragon's spine. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the storm and the salt and the relentless forward motion of the ship toward the place where stories began. In the cold north, faith was not a hymn. It was a fire you carried under your ribs, kept alive by stubbornness, and the refusal to bow your head when the wind tried to snap your neck. Joran's voice was low, not out of reverence, but out of necessity. The barn's walls had gaps where old boards had warped, and the night outside was full of ears. He stood before a crude shelf of stones that served as an altar, a lantern casting thin light across the gathered faces, lined, hungry, determined. Svari knelt closest. Her hands were rough, knuckles scarred as if even prayer had to be fought for. A strip of leather bound her wrist, covering what Joran knew was a tattoo she'd gotten in her youth, a stylized dragon that the Dominion now called Sedition. "Speak it," Joran said, and the words felt like a blade held too near the tongue. Not loud, not like a challenge, like a promise you intend to keep. They breathed together, the barn's air thick with hay dust and fear. "Tea," began an old man, then swallowed hard, as if the sound had caught in his throat. Joran watched him with a tenderness that surprised even himself. "No shame," he murmured. "It's harder when you've been made to think it's forbidden." Svari lifted her head. Her eyes shone wet, not with weakness, but with anger. "They can outlaw a word," she whispered, "but they can't reach into my skull and scrub the memory." "Careful," Joran warned. "Careful," she echoed bitterly. "Careful is how we got here. A child, no more than 10, shifted beside his mother and looked up at Joran with a question too large for his face. "Is he gone?" the boy asked. "Is Talos angry?" The name fell into the barn like a stone into deep water. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. No thunder. No triumphant glow. Just cold silence, and the lantern's small, stubborn flame. Joran forced his lungs to work. "He is not angry," he said. "He is listening." He did not add what he feared. That listening did not always mean answering. Outside, far off, a dog barked once and then stopped. The worshippers froze, heads turning. Joran held up a hand, palm outward, the gesture of a man commanding a shield wall. Boots crunched in snow somewhere beyond the barn, slow and deliberate. Not a farmer coming home. Not a drunk wandering. Svari's fingers slid beneath her collar, touching the hidden amulet there. Joran saw the movement and felt a pulse of pride so sharp it hurt. "Lantern," he breathed. "Now." Someone snuffed it fast. Darkness swallowed them, but their breaths still made pale ghosts of their bodies. In the dark, Joran's mind went to an old story. Talos as a man, hiding in snow, refusing to be killed by fate. He clung to that image like a rope. The boots outside stopped. A voice, smooth, accented, calm, spoke in the night. By order of the Aldmeri Dominion, it said, "Open." The door cracked inward with a sound like bone. Cold air and torchlight spilled into the barn, turning the darkness into a cage of moving shadows. Joran blinked against the sudden glare, and in that sliver of vision he saw white cloaks and polished armor, the Dominion's colors worn like a moral certainty. Mainlorn stepped inside as if he were entering a court, not a barn full of frightened peasants. His torchbearers fanned out behind him, lighting corners with practiced ease. They did not look surprised by what they found. They looked satisfied. Joran moved before he thought, putting his body between the justiciar and the huddled worshippers. It was an old instinct, the kind that made men raise shields for strangers in battle. He had been a soldier once, long ago, before the temple and the secret prayers. "You have no right," Joran said. Mainlorn's eyes traveled over him as if cataloging defects. "I have every right," he replied, voice almost gentle. "Your empire signed it." "Skyrim is not the empire," Svari spat from the dark. Mainlorn turned his head toward the sound. One of the torches dipped, illuminating her face. Recognition flickered. He remembered her, or remembered the kind of her. "You," Mainlorn said. "The woman from Whiterun. The one who struck a justiciar with a hammer and claimed it was an accident." Svari's jaw clenched. "It was an accident," she said. "I meant to kill him." A few of the worshippers made small sounds. Not laughter exactly, but something like it, desperate sparks in a room about to drown. Mainlorn's mouth did not move. "Bravery," he said. "How human of you." He lifted his hand, palm up. Two soldiers seized the old man who had stammered earlier, dragging him forward. The man cried out, voice cracking. His wife sobbed and reached for him, then recoiled when a spear's point turned toward her belly. Joran's heart hammered. He could feel the barn's walls like they were pressing inward. The air tasted of sweat and fear. "Say it," Mainlorn commanded the old man. "Say the name." The old man's lips trembled. His eyes darted to Joran, pleading. "Don't," Joran hissed. Mainlorn's gaze snapped to him. "You will not give orders here." The old man swallowed, throat bobbing. "Talos," he whispered. For a heartbeat, the torches guttered. Not enough to be obvious. Not enough for anyone but Joran to feel the wrongness, like a thread pulled through the world's weave. Mainlorn smiled, just barely. "There," he said, as if demonstrating a trick. "No thunder, no divine wrath. Only a frightened old man and his illegal noise." He nodded. The soldiers tightened their grip. "Take them," Mainlorn ordered. The priest, the hammer woman, anyone with an amulet. The barn erupted into movement. Hands grabbing, bodies shoving, someone screaming as they hit the floor. Joran lunged for Mainlorn, not with a weapon but with his fists, the way a man fought when he had nothing else left. Mainlorn's sword hilt cracked against Joran's temple. White light exploded behind his eyes. He tasted blood and old hay and fury. As he fell, Joran saw Svari wrestle free long enough to drive her hidden knife into a torchbearer's thigh. The man went down with a howl. For an instant, the torch rolled across the barn floor, flame-licking straw.gi. "Run!" Joran tried to shout, but the word came out thick. Some did. Some couldn't. Boots stamped. Hands closed. The Dominion moved through the barn like a tide, and Joran understood with sick clarity that this was not a raid for prisoners. It was a harvest. The embassy smelled of citrus and money. The air was warmer than it had any right to be, perfumed and controlled, as if the Dominion could negotiate with winter itself. Cassia moved among the guests with a servant's bowed head and a tray of sugared figs balanced on her palm. Her eyes lowered just enough to seem obedient. Elenwen's laughter drifted across the hall like a silk ribbon. It wrapped itself around Imperial nobles who had forgotten the feel of rope. Cassia watched the ambassador from the edges of her vision, careful not to stare. Elenwen stood beneath banners embroidered with golden eagles and stylized stars. Her posture flawless, her expression composed into the shape of benevolence. She wore the Dominion's confidence like armor, not heavy, not cumbersome, but absolute. A count with a pink, soft face leaned in toward her, smiling too widely. Cassia heard him say, "We are grateful for continued peace." Elenwen's reply was quiet, intimate, the sort of thing meant to make a man feel chosen. "Peace is a garden," she said. "It requires weeding." The count chuckled, mistaking cruelty for wit. "And Skyrim?" "A thorn bush," Elenwen said. "But thorns can be blunted. They can even be removed." Cassia's grip tightened on her tray. She moved closer, forcing her breath to remain steady, and passed behind Elenwen's chair just as the ambassador's voice dropped further. "It's remarkable," Elenwen was saying, "how quickly a populace adapts when the state provides certainty. A law here, an arrest there. Soon the old prayers feel childish." The nobleman's face grew earnest, as if receiving instruction from a beloved tutor. "Some of us still worry," he confessed. "That certain sentiments persist." Elenwen smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman looking at a puzzle she had already solved. "Then we will correct the sentiment," she said. "Not by force alone. Force is loud. Correction is quiet." Cassia felt the words like fingertips on her spine. Correction. Quiet. Weed the garden. She drifted toward a side corridor where lesser officials gathered, their voices hushed and quick. The Dominion's servants were better trained than the Empire's. They did not gossip about lovers or wine. They spoke in clipped phrases, carrying messages like blood carries sickness. "The clauses are prepared," one murmured in Aldmeri. "Balfiera receives them," another answered. Cassia's pulse jumped. She kept her face blank and poured wine for a man whose ring bore the ruby throne's crest. He barely glanced at her. From behind a column, she caught a flicker of movement, Decision, watching, expression carved from worry. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. He did not nod. He did not signal. The embassy was full of eyes that were not human. Cassia moved away again. Tray steady, her mind racing. Balfiera. Clauses prepared. This was more than politics. It had the feel of ritual dressed up in paperwork. As she passed a side table, she let her fingers brush a stack of documents, sliding the top sheet beneath her tray with the ease of long practice. The paper was warm from someone's hand. The ink smelled fresh. Elenwen's voice rose again. A toast now. To harmony, she said. The hall echoed the word. Harmony dight. Cassia thought of Emil's empty niche, and felt a coldness bloom in her chest that no embassy fire could touch. The room Decision had found smelled of cheap ale and damp wool. A single candle burned on the table, its flame bending whenever the wind pushed at the cracked window pane. Cassia laid the stolen embassy sheet flat and watched the ink glisten like fresh blood. Decision stood opposite her, arms folded, his armor unbuckled but still on. Habit or fear? He had barred the door with a chair, as if furniture could stop politics. What does it say? He asked. Cassia traced the lines with her finger, translating as she went. The document was written in Imperial legal script, but the margins held neat Aldmeri notes, sharp as knife cuts. She recognized the structure immediately. Clause upon clause nested like traps. It's a requisition, she said. Authority invoked under the Concordat. Access to a site of mutual historical significance. Her mouth tightened. That's Adamantine Tower. Decision cursed under his breath. Cassia kept reading, and the candle flame seemed to thin as if it too leaned in. They're bringing items for harmonization. Relics. Witnesses. She paused at a phrase and felt her skin prickle. And speech act of negation. Decision frowned. Speech act? A legal term. Cassia swallowed. In some older magic too. Words that do not describe the world. Words that make the world. He stared at her. You're saying they're going to use the Concordat like a spell. I'm saying they already have. Cassia tapped the paper. Look, these references. They're not only invoking the treaty. They're invoking precedent. Old court rulings. Imperial edicts. They're building a scaffolding of law around the idea that Talos is not divine. Then they'll bring it to a place where ideas become foundational. Decision's face went rigid. That's madness. Cassia thought of Nord's whispering prayers in barns, of Emil's tired eyes, of Elenwen's smile. No, she said. It's ambition. She slid another page from the packet Decision had given her earlier. This one was a shipping manifest, written in Thalmor cipher. Cassia had cracked enough codes in enough dusty rooms to feel the pattern quickly. Her stomach turned. They're transporting prisoners, she murmured. From Skyrim, marked as devotional specimens. Decision went very still. Specimens. Cassia's throat tightened around anger. People, she said. They're bringing people who believe, because you can't unmake a god in an empty room. You need the faith to cut. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. The candle trembled. For an instant, Cassia remembered the torches guttering in the barn. She hadn't been there, but she could feel it anyway, a sympathetic shiver in the world. Decision leaned closer, voice low. We tell the council, and they tell the Dominion, Cassia said. She met his gaze. No, we go ourselves. Decision stared at her as if weighing her sanity. You're a scribe. I'm an archivist, Cassia corrected. And archives are where empires hide their crimes. She folded the embassy sheet carefully, as if it were a sacred text. If they're going to Adamantine Tower, then that's where the story will change. I won't sit here and let them write it alone. Decision's jaw clenched. He looked suddenly older than his years. If we go, he said, we might not come back. Cassia slipped the pewter disc onto the table. It caught candlelight, dull and stubborn. Then we go anyway, she said. Asha had been born with the tower's shadow across her cradle. Even as a child, she had learned to read the weather by how it struck the stone, whether the wind came gentle, almost respectful, or savage, as if the sea resented anything that dared stand against it. Tonight, the wind was cruel. She stood on the terrace of Direnni Holdings with her hands clasped behind her back. Posture perfect because perfection was sometimes the only defense left to a dwindling house. Below, waves battered the cliffs, sending up spray that turned to ice on the black rock. Beyond, the Adamantine Tower rose from the island's spine, older than treaties, older than the petty mortal need to draw borders. It did not look impressive the way Imperial monuments did. It looked inevitable. The Thalmor envoys came along the terrace path in a line of white cloaks. Lanterns swung at their sides, glowing like captive moons. Their leader walked with the casual confidence of someone who believed history owed him favors. Asha's steward, a thin Breton with anxious eyes, hovered behind her. "My lady," he whispered, "we could refuse them. We can bar the gate." "No, And then what?" Asha asked softly. "They return with ships, or with parchment that turns into law the moment it touches our doorstep." She did not turn to look at him. "A gate is wood. They have time." The envoys halted at the proper distance, as if even the Dominion's arrogance recognized the old rules of noble space. The leader bowed shallowly. "Lady Direnni," he said, voice smooth as polished marble. "We bring greetings from the Aldmeri Dominion and gratitude for your cooperation." Asha did not return the bow. "You bring wind and noise," she replied. "I've enough of both." The envoy's smile did not falter. "We bring purpose." "I've heard the Dominion is very fond of purpose," Asha said. "It allows you to excuse almost anything." Behind the envoy, another figure stepped forward. An Altmer in finer robes, hood down, hair bound in a style that spoke of ritual rather than politics. His gaze flicked once to the tower, quick and hungry, and Asha felt an old unease tighten in her gut. "You have requested access," Asha said, making the words sound like an accusation. "We've been granted access," the envoy corrected, and held out a sealed document. The wax bore the Dominion's crest. "By mutual agreement, under the Concordat." Asha did not touch it. Her steward took it instead, fingers shaking. "You wish to enter the tower," Asha said, eyes fixed on the ritualist now. The envoy inclined his head. "We must conduct a survey." "A survey," Asha echoed. She looked past them at the tower's dark mass and felt her family's history like a chain around her neck. Direnni pride had once meant something. Now it was a currency the world no longer accepted. "And if I refuse?" The envoy's smile widened by a hair. "Then you place yourself outside the agreement. Outside protection." Protection. The word had teeth. Asha tasted salt and thought of old stories. Elves and men meeting in that tower to decide what the world would become. She wondered suddenly, what would happen if someone tried to renegotiate the decision? "Very well," she said. "You may enter, but understand this. The tower does not belong to you. It does not belong to me. It belongs to the world." Ah. The ritualist's eyes finally met hers. There was something like pity in them, quick and buried. Then it was gone. "Of course," he said. "We are only correcting a mistake." Asha's fingers clenched behind her back. Somewhere below, the sea threw itself against stone again and again, as if trying to break what could not be broken. The tower's door was not grand. It did not need to be. It was a slab of ancient stone fitted so precisely into its frame that it looked grown rather than built. Asha stood before it with her steward and two of her household guards, feeling absurdly small, despite her title, despite the chain at her throat that marked her as Direnni. Larethil approached the threshold and paused as if listening. The wind tugged at his robes. The sea hissed below. The tower said nothing. Mainlorn's boots scraped against the steps. "Open," he told Asha's steward. Asha's steward, pale as milk, produced the old keys, heavy iron, etched with symbols that had not been in use for centuries. He inserted one into a narrow slot at the door's side. It turned with a reluctant groan, like a beast in sleep being prodded awake. The stone slab shuddered. For an instant, Asha thought it might refuse, might simply sit there in its ancient stubbornness and deny them all. Then it shifted inward, revealing darkness beyond, cool, stale air that smelled faintly of dust and something older, like dried lightning. Manlorn stepped forward first, torch raised, his cloak snapping behind him. The Thalmor guards followed. Larethil waited a heartbeat longer, eyes on the threshold as if he feared stepping over would change him. Asha's voice cut through the moment. "If you bring fire into that place," she said, "watch where you set it. Some things burn in ways you cannot anticipate." Manlorn glanced back. "Concerned for our safety, Lady Direnni?" Asha met his gaze without flinching. "Concerned for the world," she replied. "You are not the first to walk in that tower with certainty. The first people to do it made the world mortal. They may have left something behind that dislikes being disturbed." Manlorn's smile was brief, sharp. "We are not here to disturb. We are here to restore." He disappeared into the dark. Larethil passed Asha at last. His sleeve brushed her arm, and she felt a chill as if she'd touched a snowbank. He did not look at her, but his voice came low, almost private. "You should go," he said. "When it begins." Asha's pulse jumped. "Begins?" Larethil swallowed. "What is done here will travel." Asha's nails bit into her palm. "And what, exactly, are you doing?" Larethil's mouth opened, closed again. The tower's darkness yawned behind him like a waiting mouth. "Unmaking," he said finally, and then stepped into the shadow. Asha stood frozen, staring at the doorway. Her steward whispered, "My lady, we should—" "I know," she said, but her feet did not move. Asha watched the last white cloak vanish into the tower's throat and felt, with a sudden clarity that made her dizzy, that she had just opened a door not only in stone, but in history. Inside the tower, sound changed. Footsteps did not echo the way they did in human-built halls. The stone absorbed noise as if it were hungry for it. Even Manlorn's armor seemed quieter, as if the metal feared drawing attention. Larethil led them deeper, guided less by memory than by a feeling in his teeth, a pressure behind the eyes that pulsed whenever they turned toward the tower's heart. The corridors twisted in ways that made his escort mutter under their breath. Once, a guard touched a wall and hissed, yanking his hand back as if burned, though the stone looked cold. They reached a chamber with 8 pillars arranged in a ring. The ceiling arched high enough to vanish into shadow. Old runes crawled across the stone like vines, their meaning half lost even to Larethil's training. He felt watched, not by eyes, but by the accumulated weight of agreements made before language had settled into its current shapes. "This is where it happened?" Manlorn asked. "It happened everywhere," Larethil said, then regretted the honesty. He forced his voice into steadier lines. "But this is where it was decided." Manlorn made a small, impatient sound. "We don't have time for philosophy." Larethil thought, sourly, that Manlorn would become philosophy soon enough if they succeeded. Attendants began unpacking crates, laying out objects with reverent precision. The parchment strip, one of the Concordate's pages, was placed on a black altar stone at the chamber's edge. Larethil's fingers hovered over it a moment, feeling the ink's latent authority. Words written by quills in warm rooms, now carried into a place where words could become law for reality itself. He set the iron nail beside it, then the vial of red dust. The dust shifted in its glass, as if it breathed. Manlorn watched. "What is that?" "A memory," Larethil said. "Of the red diamond." Manlorn's eyebrows lifted. "The amulet is destroyed." "Or many things," Larethil murmured. "Their absence can still be harvested." He moved to the ring of pillars and began fitting metal stands between them, each stand bearing a candle holder and a small dish for offerings. 8 stands. He left the 9th space empty, an absence that made his skin crawl. Mainlord noticed. Why leave one out? Larethil's throat tightened. He forced the words out. Because we are not invoking him. We are negating him. Mainlorn's eyes gleamed. Good. The attendants lit the candles. Their flames burned steady despite the tower's still air. The chamber filled with warm light that did not banish the shadows so much as give them shapes. Larethil pulled a thin blade from his sleeve and drew it across his palm. Blood welled, bright against his pale skin. He let it drip into the dish at the altar's base. In the beginning, he whispered in Aldmeri, and the phrase felt wrong in his mouth here, as if the tower recognized it as theft. In the beginning there was a lie. The candle flames did not flicker. But somewhere deep in the stone, something shifted, like an enormous creature adjusting in its sleep. Joran woke in snow, his mouth full of blood and grit. For a moment he didn't know where he was, only that the world had become cold and white and very far away. Hakon crouched beside him, one hand on Joran's shoulder. The guide's single eye was sharp, reflecting moonlight like ice. You're alive, Hakon said. That's either luck or God's joke. Joran tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his skull, and the night spun. He remembered the barn door splintering, torches, Mainlorn's calm voice. He remembered Svari's knife flash. Then hands on him, rough and efficient, dragging. How? Joran began, and his tongue stumbled. Hakon pressed a flask to his lips. The liquid was harsh, burning down his throat. You don't have time to ask, Hakon said. Drink, move. The white cloaks aren't far behind. Joran's hands fumbled at his belt, searching for the amulet he'd worn since he'd become a priest. His fingers met bare skin. Panic flared in him like fever. They took it, he rasped. They took a lot, Hakon said grimly. I saw wagons on the road, prisoners, chains. He jerked his head toward the trees. Come on. You said you had someone to warn. Nani? Joran forced his legs under him. His knees shook. The world smelled of pine and iron. Somewhere in the dark, wolves called to each other, their voices thin with hunger. Who are you? Joran managed. Hakon snorted. A man who owes a debt, he said. You fed my sister when the Legion burned our farm, and you didn't ask what god she prayed to while she ate. He leaned closer. Besides, I'm curious what scares a priest enough to run through the mountains bleeding. Joran swallowed. The air felt too sharp. They're taking the faithful, he said. They're bringing them south. High Rock. Hakon's brow furrowed. Why? Joran's mind reached for explanation and found only dread. Because they think belief is a rope, he whispered. And if they pull the right strand, the whole knot comes undone. They started up the pass, stumbling through drifts. Each step sent pain jarring through Joran's skull. He kept moving anyway, because stopping meant remembering faces in torchlight, hands bound, prayers cut short. At a rise, the wind shifted, and Joran felt something like pressure against his chest, as if an invisible hand pressed 2 fingers to his sternum and held. He tried to pray. The words came, familiar as breath, but when he reached the name at the center of his faith, his tongue hesitated. Not from fear, from absence. Joran froze, heart pounding. Hogg looked back. What is it? Joran forced himself to speak the name aloud, testing it the way you tested ice. Talos. The word left his mouth and vanished into the night with no echo, no warmth. Joran's skin prickled. Hakon's single eye narrowed. You look like you've seen a draugr. Joran stared at the dark line of pines ahead and felt, for the first time in his life, the possibility that a god could be made distant not by death, but by design. The road west out of Cyrodiil was a scar stitched through hills and old forests, its stones broken by frost and neglect. Cassia rode with her cloak wrapped tight, rain slicking her hair against her cheeks. The horse beneath her was borrowed and already regretted it, breathing hard, hooves slipping in mud. Decision had gone ahead at dawn, taking a different route. "If they catch one of us," he'd said, "the other might still get through." He'd said it like a soldier. Cassia had heard what he meant. If the Dominion caught one of them, the other would have to keep moving anyway. The thought sat in her stomach like lead. She glanced back and saw them between the trees. Pale cloaks, steady pace, too disciplined to be bandits. The Dominion did not hurry. It did not need to. It knew the world was built, in part, to favor its patience. Cassia urged the horse forward. The animal's ears flattened, sensing pursuit. The road narrowed as it entered a stretch of pines. Mist curled low over the ground, and the trees rose like dark columns. For a heartbeat, Cassia imagined herself inside Adamantine Tower already, swallowed by stone and silence. A branch snapped behind her. Not close, but closer than it had been. Cassia's mind raced through options the way it always had in archives. If you cannot outrun the fire, you find a different shelf to hide the book on. Ahead, fallen oak lay across the road, half rotted, its trunk slick with moss. Cassia guided the horse off the path into the undergrowth, ignoring the sting of wet branches against her face. She rode blind through ferns and mud until she found a shallow creek cutting through the trees. The horse splashed in, water cold around its legs. Cassia slid down from the saddle, leading it under a low overhang where the bank jutted out. She pressed herself beside the horse, breath held, listening. Hooves on stone. Voices in Aldmeri, clipped and precise. A laugh, low, like someone amused by praise, attempt at cleverness. Cassia's hand found the dagger at her belt, fingers slick with rain. The Thalmor riders passed near the creek. Cassia saw boots, the edge of a white cloak, the gleam of metal. The horse trembled beside her. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against its damp neck, murmuring nonsense, sounds meant to soothe. A rider paused. Cassia felt it like a shadow crossing her skin. For a moment she thought she heard the rider inhale, scenting the air like a wolf. Then another voice called, impatient. The rider clicked their tongue and the hooves moved on. Cassia did not breathe until the sound faded into the trees. When she finally exhaled, it came out shaky. She looked down at her hands and saw that she'd been clutching the pewter disc again, as if it were a talisman stronger than any sword. She slipped it back into her sleeve and climbed onto the horse. The west lay ahead, and somewhere beyond that, an island and a tower and a room where words were about to be used as weapons. Cassia kicked the horse into a weary trot and did not look back again. The sea carried Cassia to Balfiera the way a rumor carried itself, quiet, persistent, impossible to stop once it had found a mouth. Branwen's boat was small and stubborn, its hull patched so many times it looked more like a quilt than a vessel. The woman herself was the same, weathered, scarred, held together by sheer refusal. She said little as they crossed, her hands steady on the oars, her eyes scanning the water as if expecting it to betray them. When they reached the cove, Cassia stepped into icy surf and nearly lost her footing. Branwen caught her elbow with a grip like iron. "Don't fall," Branwen muttered. "The island eats the clumsy." Cassia regained balance, water soaking her boots. She looked up and saw the tower in the distance, rising from the island's spine. Even from here it felt wrong, too old, too certain. It made the sky around it seem like an afterthought. Branwen followed her gaze and spat into the sand. "That thing," she said. "My grandmother said it's a nail hammered through the world, keeps everything from coming apart." Cassia swallowed. "And if someone pulls the nail?" Branwen's eyes narrowed. "Then you best hope you're not standing too close." She jerked her chin toward the scrubby path leading inland. "You've got what you wanted. Quiet landing, no questions. My part's done." Cassia reached into her pouch for coin, but Branwen shook her head. "Keep it," she said. "Use it to buy a grave if you need one." "That's not comforting." Branwen gave a short, humorless laugh. "Comfort's for people who stay home." Cassia hesitated, then asked, "Have you seen Dominion ships?" Branwen's expression hardened. "They came 2 nights ago," she said. "Big ones. Soldiers. Crates. They paid the Direnni for dock rights. The Direnni pretended they had a choice." Cassia nodded. The world felt suddenly smaller. Every path led back to the same handful of people with power, and power always seemed to find the same few stones to stand on. Branwen stepped back toward her boat. "If you're smart," she said, "you turn around." Cassia looked again at the tower. "If I were smart," she said softly, "I'd never have learned to read." Branwen snorted. "Hey, that'll ruin you." She shoved the boat off, climbing in with practiced ease. Before she pushed out into deeper water, she glanced at Cassia once, her eyes unexpectedly sharp with something almost kind. "If you hear the island humming," Branwen called, "run." Cassia watched her go, then turned toward the path. The wind off the sea cut through her cloak. She thought of Decision somewhere on another shore, of Joran bleeding in snow, of Elenwen raising a glass to harmony. Cassia started inland. The island's scrub gave way to stone steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. Each step felt like walking deeper into a story that did not want new characters. Cassia found the cells by following sound. The faint drip of water, the distant murmur of voices that were not quite echoes. The tower's interior shifted as she moved, corridors branching in ways that defied the map she'd sketched from stolen notes. Twice she thought she was circling back on herself, only to find a different door where none had been before. She kept her lantern low, the flame hooded. The Thalmor torches burned brighter and steadier than hers, their light almost arrogant. Cassia did not want arrogant light. She wanted to be a shadow with a pulse. The cell corridors smelled of damp stone and old iron. Bars lined the walls, most of them empty, their doors hanging open like broken jaws. In one, a figure sat slumped against the wall, knees drawn up, head bowed. Cassia's breath caught. She stepped closer, lantern lifting just enough. Svari's face emerged from the dark, bruised, cut at the lip, but unmistakable. One eye was swollen, nearly shut. Her wrists were chained, the links thick and new against the tower's ancient rust. Cassia's mind stumbled over the impossibility. "You're—" she began and stopped, because names were dangerous here. Svari lifted her head slowly. For a moment her gaze was unfocused, as if she expected another beating, another order to perform. Then her one open eye sharpened on Cassia's face. "Who in oblivion are you?" Svari rasped. Cassia knelt by the bars. "A friend," she said, and realized how ridiculous it sounded. Svari's laugh turned into a cough. "Friends don't wear clean boots." Cassia winced. "They brought you here," she said. "From Skyrim." Svari's jaw tightened. "They brought a lot," she spat. "Men. Dutch. Women. Some barely old enough to grow beard." Her fingers clenched around chain links until her knuckles went white. "They made us say it." "Say what?" Cassia asked, though she knew. Svari's throat bobbed. For a moment she looked away, shame fighting anger. "The name," she whispered. "They wanted it spoken by mouths that meant it. Like they needed the sound from a believer." Cassia's stomach twisted. "Why?" Svari's gaze came back hard. "Because they're not banning worship anymore," she said. "They're gutting it. I heard them talking in that smooth elf tongue. They said the tower remembers. They said if you make the tower remember Talos as a lie, the world will too." "No, baby. Guandisha." Cassia's lantern flame fluttered, and she felt a sudden, irrational urge to shield it with her body. "I'm trying to stop them," she said. Svari's laugh was thin. "Then you're late," she said. "They started hours ago. I felt it." She swallowed. "It's like when you reach for a tool you've used your whole life and find your hand closing on air." Cassia's fingers tightened on the lantern. "Can you walk?" Svari tested her chains, rattling them softly. Not without taking the wall with me, she said. Unless you've got a key. Cassia's mind raced. She had a hairpin, a dagger, and a stubbornness she'd mistaken for courage. I'll come back, she promised. Sverri's expression sharpened into something like pity. Don't, she said. If you can still run, run. Tell someone. Tell everyone. Shout the name until your throat bleeds. Cassia stared at her through the bars, struck by the raw simplicity of it. The whole war reduced to whether a mouth could hold a syllable. Far away, deeper in the tower, a low hum began. So subtle Cassia thought at first it was the sea. Then the stone under her knees vibrated. Sverri's eye widened. That, she whispered. That's what I told you. Cassia rose slowly, lantern shaking. The hum grew, filling the corridor like a held breath. The chamber felt warmer than it should have, as if the tower's stone had decided to imitate flesh. The candle's flames held steady, their light pooling around the 8 stands and leaving the 9th space a dark wound. Larethil stood within the ring, face slick with sweat, eyes wide with strain. His voice was raw now, scraping over each syllable. The chant had become less like song, and more like a man forcing a door shut against a storm. Elenwen watched from the raised platform near the altar, her hands folded, her expression composed into something almost serene. If she felt awe, she did not show it. If she felt horror, she buried it beneath diplomacy. Mainlorn dragged one of the prisoners forward by a chain. The captive stumbled, wrists bound, hair matted. Larethil forced himself not to look too closely at the face. If he recognized the prisoner as a person, the ritual might falter. Personhood was an inconvenience. Asha stood rigid near the edge, guards close, her expression a mask stretched tight over fury. Larethil did not meet her gaze. Her presence was a reminder that even ancient houses could be made to stand still while strangers rewrote the world. Larethil raised his hand, palm outward. Speak, he commanded, switching into the rougher consonants of the common tongue. Speak the name you have carried. The prisoner's shoulders shook. No, they croaked. Mainlorn jerked the chain hard. The captive fell to their knees with a cry. Speak, Mainlorn said quietly, or we will remove your tongue and have someone else do it for you. Elenwen's lips parted. For a heartbeat, Larethil thought she might object, might insist on a gentler method. Then she closed her mouth again and looked away, as if refusing to witness were the same as refusing to participate. The prisoner sobbed once, a raw animal sound. Then, trembling, they whispered, Talos. The words struck the chamber like a spark. The candle flames bent inward, as if bowing toward the center. The hum in the stone rose, a deep note that settled into Larethil's bones. His teeth ached. He turned toward the altar. The concordat parchment lay pinned by the iron nail, inked clauses gleaming. Larethil began to recite them, not as law, but as invocation. Each phrase was a blade laid against the world's throat. By mutual accord, he intoned, voice steady despite the sweat on his skin. By the binding of sovereign will, by the declaration of falsehood made true. The air shimmered. The shadows at the chamber's edge seemed to thicken, as if something unseen leaned in. Asha's fingers curled into fists. This is profanation, she hissed. Mainlorn glanced at her. This is correction, he replied. Larethil's chant quickened. He poured the vial's red dust into a dish at the altar. The dust lifted into the air without wind, forming a brief swirling shape like a jewel shattered into smoke. He saw, in that red shimmer, a flash of a city on fire and a man in a crown of dragonbone. He saw a throat cut and a throne claimed. He saw the world bending around a name. Then he spoke the negation, the phrase Neriel had taught him, the words meant to turn a god into an error. The tower hummed louder. The candle flames did not flicker, but their light seemed to narrow, focusing, as if the chamber itself were drawing breath for something enormous. The backlash came not as an explosion but as a pressure drop, sudden and brutal, like stepping from warm air into a void. Larethil's vision blurred. The chamber tilted. For a heartbeat he could not feel his feet on stone, only the sensation of falling upward, away from the world, toward something vast and blank. The tower's hum rose into a sound so low it was felt more than heard. The candles flared, their flames stretching long and thin, almost colorless. Shadows twisted along the pillars, runes seeming to crawl as if alive. Outside, thunder cracked. The stone ceiling vibrated. Asha's hair lifted as if charged with lightning. Larethil clutched at his own robe, fingers digging into fabric. He felt a presence, immense and furious, not in the chamber but threaded through it, like a storm trying to force itself through a keyhole. A voice brushed the edge of his mind, not a spoken thing but an impression of words, a roar that could have been laughter or rage or both. He saw snowfields. He saw a warhammer swinging. He saw a man's mouth open in a shout that tore the air into submission. Not Talos. Something older. Something that had been used to make Talos possible. Larethil gasped. "Hold!" he rasped in Aldmeri, not sure whether he was commanding the ritual or begging the tower itself. Mainlorn stepped closer, bracing a hand on one of the pillars as if to steady the world. "Continue," he said through clenched teeth. Elenwen's composure cracked. Her eyes widened, and for the first time Larethil saw fear in her, a flash, quick and bright. She gripped the stone railing. "What is that?" she whispered, not to anyone in particular. "The lie resisting," Mainlorn snarled. Asha's laugh cut through the hum, sharp as breaking glass. "That," she said, voice shaking with something like delight, "is the tower remembering you are nothing." Lightning struck outside with a sound like the sky splitting. For an instant, the chamber's shadows turned white, and Larethil saw a shape hovering above the altar. An outline only, like a man made of storm cloud and old blood, crowned with something that might have been a dragon's jawbone. The outline leaned toward him. Larethil felt its attention like a blade laid against his throat. Then the image shattered, blown apart by the chant still forcing itself out of Larethil's mouth. He clung to the words, reciting the negation again and again, each repetition like hammering nails into a coffin. The tower's hum wavered, then steadied. The candle flames shortened. The pressure eased slightly, enough for Larethil to breathe again. But the storm outside did not fade. It circled the tower like a predator. Lightning clawed at clouds, and in one jagged flash, the shape of a dragon's ribs seemed to form across the sky. Elenwen stared upward, lips parted. "If this is what victory sounds like," she murmured, "what does defeat sound like?" Asha closed her eyes as if in prayer or in mourning. "It sounds like forgetting," she whispered. Larethil heard her, and something cold slid down his spine. Forgetting. Yes, that was the weapon. Not fire, not sword. Erasure. He forced the next line of the chant out, voice hoarse. The tower accepted it like a judge accepting a sentence. Cassia ran with the tower's hum shaking her bones. She could feel the ritual like a tide pulling at her, drawing her deeper whether she wanted it or not. Every corridor she took seemed to lean toward the chamber, her feet dragged by unseen gravity. She had to stop it. She did not know how, only that doing nothing was worse. A turn, then another. The air grew warmer, tinged with candle smoke. Voices echoed ahead, chanting, low and relentless. Cassia's lantern flame danced as if panicked. She smothered it further with her hand, squinting into the dark. Then a figure stepped from a side passage, blocking her path, and the tower's shadows seemed to arrange themselves around him like obedient dogs. Mainlorn.T. He stood half-turned, sword not yet drawn but close enough to be an extension of his arm. Lightning flashed outside, leaking through unseen cracks, and for an instant his armor gleamed cold as moonlit bone. Cassia stopped short. Her breath came hard. She felt suddenly very aware of how small she was, how human. Mainlorn's eyes narrowed. "You," he said, as if she were an unexpected stain. Cassia's hand went to the dagger she'd taken from a careless attendant, thin, ceremonial, but sharp enough. "Move," she said. Her voice did not crack. She was proud of that. Absurdly. Mainlorn smiled. "You should not be here." "No?" Cassia forced herself to take a step forward. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." Mainlorn's gaze flicked to her lantern, then to her sleeve. For a heartbeat, Cassia thought he could see the pewter disc hidden there. Could smell her secret like blood. "You're late," Mainlorn said softly. "The words have already been spoken." "Words can be unsaid," Cassia snapped. Mainlorn's laugh was quiet. "No," he said. "Not here." He drew his sword, the sound too smooth, too practiced. Cassia's stomach clenched. She raised the dagger, knowing it was laughable. Knowing it didn't matter. Mainlorn stepped in, quick. Cassia slashed at his face. He caught her wrist with his free hand and twisted. Pain shot up her arm. The dagger clattered to the stone. Cassia bit back a cry. She drove her knee up into his thigh. He grunted, more annoyed than hurt, and shoved her hard against the wall. Her lantern slammed, flames sputtering. The stone behind her was cold and unyielding. Mainlorn leaned close enough she could see the faint scar at his temple, the tiny imperfections that proved he was not a myth. "You will not stop this," he murmured. "You can barely stop your own heartbeat." Cassia's vision swam. She thought of Svari behind bars, of Joran's missing amulet, of Amiel's empty niche. Something in her chest hardened. She spat in Mainlorn's face. For an instant, surprise flickered in his eyes. Cassia used it. She slammed her forehead into his nose. Pain exploded through her skull, but Mainlorn reeled back with a curse. Cassia shoved past him, snatching the dagger from the floor as she went. Mainlorn recovered fast. His hand caught her cloak, tearing fabric. Cassia stumbled forward, freed by the rip, and sprinted toward the chanting. Behind her, Mainlorn's voice sliced through the corridor. "After her," he ordered, calm again. "Do not kill her. Bring her to hear the end." Cassia's lungs burned. The tower's hum grew louder. She ran toward the sound of history being rewritten, knowing she might arrive only in time to witness the moment the world forgot how to say the name she carried like a secret blade. Cassia reached the chamber as the air tightened. She stood at the threshold, half hidden in shadow, watching 8 candles pull their flames inward toward the empty ninth space. The light looked wrong, as if the world had forgotten how to behave in the presence of what was happening. Larethil was in the center, face slick with sweat, eyes glassy with strain. His voice was raw now, scraping over each syllable. The chant had become less like song and more like a man forcing a door shut against a storm. Elenwen's lips moved silently, not in prayer but in calculation, as if she were counting costs. Asha stood rigid near the edge, guards close, her expression a mask stretched tight over fury. Mainlorn entered behind Cassia, quiet as a shadow, his hand on her shoulder like a brand. Cassia did not resist. Her body trembled, not from fear alone but from the pressure in the air, the feeling that something enormous leaned over them all. Larethil raised his bleeding hand toward the altar. The concordat parchment lay pinned beneath the iron nail. The red dust hovered above it, swirling, coalescing into a shape like a jewel, and then dissolving again. He spoke the final phrase, short, sharp, decisive. The tower's hum stopped. Not faded. Stopped. As if someone had cut a string that held the world's note in place. For a heartbeat there was no sound at all. Cassia could not hear her own breath. The candle's flames froze, suspended in the air like painted light. Then the flames snapped out all at once. Darkness flooded the chamber. In that dark, Cassia felt something slip in her mind. A memory tugged free, not fully gone but suddenly hard to grasp, like a word on the tip of the tongue that refused to be caught. She tried to think the name. The name she'd carried in her sleeve, stamped in pewter, whispered in barns and alleys and prayers. Tal. Her mind slid away. Cassia's throat tightened. Panic rose hot. She forced herself to speak it aloud, to anchor it in sound. T. She choked. The syllable stuck. It wasn't fear. It was like her tongue did not recognize the shape it needed to make. Across the sea and mountains, Joran stood in a snow-choked pass with Hakon beside him, and tried to pray, and the name that had been a hearth in his chest became a cold spot. He opened his mouth and felt only air. He saw his own breath fog and vanish, and he understood the terror of a world where even breath could be taken as evidence of nothing. In the chamber, a faint light returned. Not candlelight, but a dim glow from the runes on the pillars, as if the tower itself had begun to sweat. Larethil sagged, shoulders heaving. He looked around wildly, as if expecting the world to collapse. Elenwen exhaled, a sound that might have been relief. Asha whispered something in a language Cassia did not know, and tears ran down the noblewoman's face without changing her expression. Rage and grief were sometimes too large for the body to hold separately. Manlorn's grip tightened on Cassia's shoulder. "It is done," he said, voice reverent for the first time. Cassia's hand shook as she reached into her sleeve and pulled out the pewter disc. In the faint rune glow, she saw the stamp on it blur. The dragon's line softened. The profile, once proud and defiant, seemed to smear, as if the metal had grown tired of remembering. Cassia's stomach lurched. "No," she whispered, and hated that the word felt small. Larethil lifted his head, eyes glassy. "Not no," he breathed, as if correcting her even now. "Not anymore." Dawn found the tower still standing. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Asha stood at the entrance alone, guards dismissed by Mainlorn's curt command, her steward nowhere to be seen. She pressed her palm to the stone door and felt warmth beneath it, subtle but undeniable, as if the tower's heart had begun to beat faster. The sea wind whipped her hair across her face. She did not brush it away. Behind her, footsteps scraped. Larethil emerged into the gray light like a man walking out of a fever dream. His robes were rumpled, stained with blood at the cuff. His eyes did not quite focus on the world. He looked past it. Elenwen followed, composed again, but something in her mouth's tightness suggested the composure was an injury she kept reopening and sealing. She glanced at the horizon where the storm clouds had finally thinned. The sky looked rinsed, too clean, as if something had been scrubbed. Mainlorn appeared last, his sword sheathed, his posture relaxed in the way men were relaxed only after they'd done something irreversible. He spoke briefly to an attendant, and the attendant hurried away toward the docks. Ships would carry news. Papers would carry orders. The world would be told gently that it had always been this way. Asha turned to Larethil. "Do you feel proud?" she asked. Larethil's throat worked. "I feel..." He searched for the word, and found only emptiness. "Quiet." Asha's laugh was brittle. "Yes," she said. "That's what you wanted." Larethil flinched. For a heartbeat, his gaze met hers, and in it, Asha saw something like remorse. Small, frightened, human. Then it vanished behind duty. He looked away toward the sea, as if expecting it to answer. Cassia used the moment of distraction like a blade. She slipped down the tower steps, cloak torn, boots slipping on wet stone. No one called after her. No one needed to. Mainlorn had been right. The punishment was not death. It was knowledge. It was watching and being unable to change what you saw. She reached the lower path where sea mist clung to the rocks. Her lungs burned. Her head throbbed from the blow she'd taken in the corridor, and from something worse, a bruise inside her thoughts. Cassia pulled the pewter disc out again. It felt lighter somehow. She stared at it until her eyes watered. The face was gone. Not scraped. Not worn. Gone as if it had never been stamped there at all. The dragon remained, blurred at the edges like a sketch left in rain. But the profile, proud human features that had once stared into the future, had become smooth metal. Cassia's hands shook violently. "I remember," she whispered, though the sentence felt like it needed an object she could not name. She tried again, forcing the sound out. "Talos." The word came easier now, but not right. It sounded like a foreign term she'd learned from a book, not a name that had lived in her blood. Her skin crawled. On a mountain pass far to the north, Joran knelt in snow and tried to pray. The words fell from his mouth like stones, heavy and useless. When he reached the center, he felt only a blankness, a missing hearth. He pressed his forehead to the ice until it burned, trying to force sensation into memory. Hakon watched him, silent. At last he said, "If your god won't answer, what do you do?" Joran lifted his head, eyes raw with cold and grief. He looked out over the mountains as if searching for something he had always assumed would be there. "You answer anyway," Joran said hoarsely. "You become the echo. You become the mouth that remembers when the world forgets." Back on Balfiera, Cassia stumbled down toward the cove where Branwen's boat had landed her. The sea rolled in, indifferent, patient. She tasted salt on her lips and thought, with a sudden clarity that hurt, that this was how the Dominion won, not by killing people, but by making the living feel like liars when they spoke their own history. Behind her, the tower loomed, unchanged, its stone catching dawn with the same old arrogance. Yet something about the light around it felt slightly off, as if the world's colors had shifted by a shade too pale. Cassia clutched the blank coin until it cut into her palm. Blood warmed the metal. She did not know yet how to fight a wound in reality. She only knew she would not let the emptiness settle unchallenged. She began walking, leaving small red drops on the stone steps, each one a stubborn human mark, proof that something still bled, and therefore something still lived.